Our first speaker is the fantastic Susan Laurie, and I say this because I have been reading her book, which again is very emotional, moving, powerful, at times dark, but it's a very personal story. So thank you for sharing that outside of this remit, Susan. But over to yourself, really, to hear about you. I think we have roughly 10 minutes for yourself, and then we'll move on to the following speaker.
Thank you. Thanks, Christian, for that lovely introduction. And thanks so much for inviting me to talk about my experience. And I am using notes just because it's such an important topic that I don't want to miss anything out. And first of all, apologies if you have heard my story before. But I think it's so important that people know just how low alcohol took me, so that you do know that I'm an expert on being a woman and being a mother dealing with alcohol addiction, dependence. And yeah, I went from being a completely ordinary woman, nothing unusual about me, enjoying a drink, first socializing, letting my hair down, sometimes even maybe giving me a bit of confidence with peers because I was in a high profile job. But I went from that to being as low as it's possible for alcohol to take a person. And I was in trouble with the police several times. I was waking up in hospital on a drip, not knowing how I'd got there, to ultimately at the end 24/7 drinking, where being awake was to drink and drinking was just to pass out, and waking up at 3 in the morning and drinking myself to oblivion was completely normal. I wasn't bothered about bathing or personal hygiene by then because I was on my own. I'd lost my husband and son. And but then I also had to avoid withdrawal from alcohol at all costs. The withdrawal was terrifying. The physical withdrawal of shakes and terrible stomach cramps, but the mental withdrawal was even worse. Absolutely terrifying hallucinations and such impending doom anxiety that I wanted to tear my skin off and climb the walls. So in the end, I was avoiding withdrawal at all costs. And as you can imagine, I was incredibly ill and I knew that I was dying. I was beaten then. And I don't tell this at all to be sensational. I don't, in fact, even particularly enjoy reliving that. But I do it because I know that my experience can help other people. Because while I was an ordinary woman, there is something unusual about me, and that's that I survived that. I'm very, very lucky to be here. So that is why I talk about my story. And I didn't get to that horrible place at the end overnight. It took years. Alcohol works by stealth. And I'm a textbook example of the progression of dependence from, you know, liking a drink to loving a drink to heavy drinking to then maybe problem drinking and then what people might call functioning, and then ultimately in the end not functioning. And when I was functioning, I had different roles. I functioned in them. Like I said, I was a professional in the pharmaceutical industry. I then was an entrepreneur with my own company, but by far my most important role was as a mother. And that's why I know that the stereotypes and stigma around alcohol dependence and even problem drinking are so damaging, but they're so damaging, especially to women and especially to mothers. And this is where the barriers to seeking treatment come in, because stereotypes and stigma are bad enough for anyone with a problem with alcohol. The stereotypes people have, the pictures in their mind of somebody who's irresponsible and weak, cause this stigma, a judgment, which has created a culture of blame, like you're weak, you're not trying hard enough, or it's a choice. And this causes a deep shame. And in my experience, women are judged even more harshly. And I think that might be because of our roles as carers and nurturing people. And I certainly experienced that as a sister and as a daughter. In fact, I'm even now, you know, nearly 7 years down the line, still building bridges with that. But being judged as a mother with a drink problem was even worse. The stigma and judgment around that was much worse. Being judged as unfit, as selfish, as not maternal, as a moral failure. That caused me to feel not only the real shame, but also real fear. And that fear was that I was going to have my son taken off me. My son being taken into care was the #1 barrier to me seeking help early. Even seeing my GP terrified me because I thought, do they have to report me? Is there a duty on them, a legal requirement to inform social services because I have a young child? Because all I'd ever wanted to be was a mother, and here I was using alcohol as a crutch and then getting into problem drinking. In fact, my biggest shame when I was sent off to my second rehab was that I was missing my son's 18th birthday. That was all that mattered to me. But for years before that second rehab I was in, the fear of my son being taken away, I know, prevented me from seeking help. But there came a point when I did have to seek help because it's progressive, like I said. So when I went to my GP and I had counselling, I knew that this absolutely had to work because now this was serious. I was on their radar. This was official. I had a problem with alcohol and I was a mother. So that was really scary. But when alcohol gets a grip on you, it's really, really hard to beat. And so when I did relapse, which I did often, I didn't want to admit it. I was even more scared. I was more scared that this seemed even worse because I had failed at a treatment and I was a mother, and I was terrified that they were more likely to take him off me. So I didn't go back when I'd been on these treatment courses, and many people don't go back for that reason. And sadly, it's in a lot of cases, if you complete a program and don't return, you're marked down as a success. I know that I would have been, because you haven't gone back. And that's where we have a bit of a flawed system, because people aren't routinely followed up to see if they're still sober months, years down the line. I've been told in meetings that this is because it's seen to be intrusive, which to me, if I was sober, I'd be delighted to be followed up. But so it's seen to be intrusive. So the result of that is people like me fall off the radar system, slip through the cracks until there's an absolute crisis point like the one I reached. And this fear of losing your children isn't unjustified. This fear of children being taken into care was absolutely reinforced to me when I attended Alcoholics Anonymous groups and in the rehabs that I was in. Some of the women I met there were in there or attending to get their children back. Alcoholics Anonymous and rehab were part of the process. It's like children used as a bargaining tool. So can you imagine the absolute fear and desperation while you've got a raging addiction that you don't understand and is much tougher than you thought? As a mother, how overwhelming that must be if to get your kids back, that's why you're in rehab or in Alcoholics Anonymous. For myself in rehab, I was humiliated in group therapy by a counsellor because I was an alcohol dependent mum, as if that shame would spur me on to sobriety. So because of these barriers and these real fears that we have, the reluctance, what we get is the reluctance to seek help in the first place, then a fear of admitting you've relapsed. When you're officially in the system, when you're on the radar, that fear, and people slip through the cracks. But there's another really big problem that these barriers create that I have to talk about. And that's that women like me are even more vulnerable to being exploited for money. I was many times over the years. Over the years, I spent a small fortune on at least 5 different hypnotherapists, other weird and sometimes dangerous treatments because I was that desperate to get better, but I knew I'd failed down the official route. But now, on top of these traditional therapists that charge money, we have this new phenomenon that people need to know about. The floodgates have completely opened for online and social media groups and coaches charging money. And this might be good if you're not drinking alcohol is a lifestyle choice. I totally encourage that. But if you've got a problem with alcohol, if you're a dependent drinker or even drinking too much, I know this is doing more harm than good out there. Because of the barriers that I've talked about, women are more susceptible to this. And then they have the guilt of the wasted money and they drink on that. And we are dealing with such vulnerable people here. This would not be tolerated with another illness. I'm contacted frequently about this, like I'm some sort of beacon of hope who can do something, and all I can do is talk about it. From women desperate and crying who've wasted not just a few pounds a month, but sometimes hundreds, or even in one case, she wasted over £1,000 to one of these well-known online groups, and then drinking on the guilt of that. So it has a knock-on effect. I know that I did that in the past, but it's even worse now for people because of social media. And like I said, this wouldn't be tolerated with another illness. And I've spoken to NHS England, Public Health England, MPs, the Department of Health. I know I'm a totally broken record about treatments, but I make no apologies because something needs to be done to protect vulnerable people, especially women. And like I said, I'm not unusual, and my experience is happening to many people, but I am an expert on being a woman and a mother desperately trying to beat an alcohol addiction. We need to break down these stereotypes and remove the stigma in the same way we've done with mental health. And we need to take away this fear of getting help and change the reality. And it is a reality for women and mothers who are struggling with alcohol. And we absolutely need to ensure that anyone charging money for alcohol coaching or treatment needs to be properly regulated to prevent this vulnerable group from being exploited, because it is causing real harm. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Susan. I'm sure you'll all agree that's a very powerful testimony. I know it's very difficult to speak about these things, but please do continue. You've a very important story to get out there. I do feel like you've been reading my notes, folks. You know, the number of times we talk about the stigma of mental health, but we still have a stigma over alcohol dependency. And again, referring to Dan Carlin's speech, at one point it sounded very Trainspotting-esque of choose life, and that's such a strong message we need to get out there, that there is a way through this, but we need to make sure that people can access the health and treatment services and support that they need.